Imagine that you're in a small skiff. Imagine that you're in some of the strongest tidal rips in the world. Imagine that you've just seen a whale around here somewhere, but now you don't know exactly where it is.
That whale certainly has some business.
Yep.
Right beside us, right there.
Oh, right there. Oh, geez, right on top of us.
You can imagine all this, or you can live it. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. The Bay of Fundy is home to the highest tides in the world, and nowhere is the current stronger than right here in Head Harbor Passage in Eastport. Wherever you have strong tides and cold currents, you get abundant sea life. From the dock in Eastport to the East Quoddy Head Lighthouse on Campobello, whales, seals, porpoises, and tens of thousands of seabirds congregate to feast on mackerel, herring, krill, and plankton. It's absolutely amazing, and almost nobody gets out to see it. But we will today, and the captain of this little skiff is a 13-year-old girl named Sarah. Even before the show is 3 minutes old, we'll be inside the largest whirlpool in the Western Hemisphere, the Old Sow. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Doors Equipment, Napa Auto Parts, EBS, and Supercuts in Bangor, Brewer, and Old Town. Chris Bartlett is a marine biologist and a cooperative extension specialist with the Maine Sea Grant Program. He is the go-to guy when science and fishermen have to come together to sustainably manage and promote our fisheries economy in the Coppercook Bay area. Chris and I share a passion for birds too, and we've been talking for years about getting on his skiff and motoring out into the channel between the U.S. and Canada to find some of the rare birds that can happen there. Last Sunday, we finally pulled it off. I brought my wife Sandy, and he brought his daughter Sarah. And Sarah got to take over the boat and run the expedition. Sarah is 13 years old. And even in these challenging waters, with strong tides and underwater ledges, she handled the boat beautifully. But I'm getting ahead of myself. As the show begins, we're heading down towards the dock where I can see Chris getting the boat ready. Sarah is walking up the hill towards us, carrying some fishing gear back towards Chris's truck. Hi, how are you? Good, thank you. Nice to meet you. I'm Bob Duchesne.
I'm Sandy. Nice to meet you.
I have several other reasons for visiting today. Because this area is really different than much of the Maine coast, it's got some unique challenges. Species management, rockweed harvesting, tidal power, LNG proposals, and even sharing a channel with another country makes this spot different and sometimes controversial. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let's get down to the boat. Hi, Chris. Good to see you
again. Welcome aboard.
Yes.
So I have life jackets up forward, and you're welcome to wear them. It's completely up to you. You're not required to. Just have them on the boat. I'm going to wear them so that Sarah can pick me up if I fall overboard.
We leave the dock at Harris Point Shore Cabins. Ever since the Eastport Pier partially collapsed last December, Chris has had to dock his boat over here. Coincidentally, Butch Harris runs some of the tour boats that go out of here with a company called Eastport Windjammers. Look him up if you want to have some of this fun. From Butch's dock, it's only minutes before we're in Western Passage between Eastport and Deer Island. And I've been in this swirl before.
This is the Old Sow Whirlpool.
Yeah.
And so it's these upwellings that we're seeing that will bring, invertebrate species like krill and copepods to the surface and small fish, and that's what the birds like to eat.
Yep.
So sometimes the birds are just thick here. Lately, on the coming and going tide, they've been thick. It's the coming tide right now, and I don't see too many, but that just means they're feeding somewhere else.
Oh, look at this whirlpool right here. That's great.
We call those the Old Sow's piglets.
Yeah. There's dueling definitions about how the Old Sow got its name. What's your understanding?
Well, I haven't really heard many other than local guides telling me that it was named because of the grunting sound that it made occasionally. And so that was like a pig. Everyone that I know that refers to it as the Old Sow seems to think of it as swine. Since we use the term piglets.
Yep. So Sarah, when you're steering, can you feel the tide under you? Can you?
Yeah.
It's really tugging on you.
Yeah, especially back there.
Sarah, if you'd like to go closer to the lighthouse, I think there's some birds along the rips between Deer Island and Indian Island.
Okay.
As we get further into the Old Sow, the currents become stronger. All around us, there are eddies, swirls, and gurgles. In some spots, holes open up in the water. Now and then a seal pops up, and you wonder, what are they thinking down there?
Would you like us to turn the engine off, Bob, so you can hear?
Yeah, yeah.
So do you want to put it, hold it all the way back to neutral, and turn the key off, which is towards you.
So we are right in the middle of the Old Sow, and the water is swirling around us. Now, Sarah, is this the first time you've driven the boat out here into this?
Probably one of the most recent.
Yeah.
And maybe on my own, probably. Yeah.
Are we at the tide where this would be the strongest right now, or are we actually off the strongest part of the riptide?
So as far as the tide cycle goes, the incoming tide tends to make the Old Sow boil the hardest. However, these aren't very high tides right now. We're in the middle of the moon cycle. So on new moons and full moons, it's much stronger than this. We'll have about a 23 to 25 foot tidal exchange on the new and full moons, or the spring tides. This would be a neap tide, so it gets a lot stronger.
Yeah, we're right in the middle of the biggest whirlpool in the Western Hemisphere, and we're in the middle of it right now.
Pretty impressive, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's much like being in a roiling river.
I love this.
And it's about 380 to 400 feet deep below us.
Is that right?
Much like a canyon.
Is it really? We're like right between Eastport and Deer Island. You could paddle across with not much time, and yet it's that deep.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you can see how quickly we're going up Western Passage to the St. Croix River in the tides.
Yeah. When you think of a whirlpool, you think of the little swirl at like a bathroom toilet swirling down, and in fact, we are surrounded by some of those.
And spinning around as we speak.
And spinning. Water is still swirling. We're getting surrounded by harbor porpoises, some coming in from the right side of the boat.
It's hard not to get distracted by the porpoises and seals, but what we're doing, and what Chris in particular is doing, is looking at all these birds around us. Hundreds of birds, probably thousands of birds. Most of these are Bonaparte's gulls. We're looking for a needle in a haystack. Birds that look like these, but aren't. Rare birds. When the tide is rocking like this, it pushes food toward the surface. It could be small copepods that entice these smaller birds. It could be small fish that attract the larger birds. Wherever there's a concentration of food, there's a concentration of birds. All we're doing out here is looking for where the birds are going and then going there ourselves. So we've motored across the channel to a spot just off the rocks of Campobello.
Well, welcome to New Brunswick.
Yeah, really. Yes, this is an international radio show.
So we've come over here to the shores of Campobello Island to look at this larger feeding congregation of birds, and what we're seeing is a large number of Bonaparte's gulls, and these are small tern-like gulls that stop here from their northern nesting grounds on their way south to feed and molt their flight feathers and their body feathers before heading south. And so we can have literature says up to 20,000 birds that come through here during the late summer and fall months. And it's just a fun place to go birding, because in amongst the Bonaparte's gulls, which are beautiful in their own right, we find less common gulls like little gulls and black-headed gulls and occasionally a Savin's gull, things like that that are just a lot of fun for birders.
I wrote some of that literature, and I just made it up. I don't remember if I actually saw the 20,000 figure somewhere else or not.
It is, if you go to, Canada has this listed as an important bird area, and they have listed it as up to 20,000 birds moving through.
Wow. Which, when you sit out here among all these gulls, you can easily believe that number.
Certainly, several thousand in a day, and you see that over time the flock goes from mostly adults early in August to mostly juveniles in late November. So you know that birds are moving through. It's not just the same population of birds that are here the whole time.
Well, we talk about Bonaparte's gulls, and people think of herring gulls and seagulls, but these are small, very small gulls actually, and they have the habit of nesting in trees up near the Arctic.
That's true. I think it's the only tree nesting gull that I'm aware of.
Yeah. And so they're basically freshwater nesters way up north, and then they come down here and they collect in places like this by the thousands. And what a show it puts on.
Well, in part it's because of these strong tidal currents. It brings food such as krill, small shrimp, to the surface that they can pick on. Because they can only feed at the surface. They're not diving birds. And so the currents afford them a bonanza of food that they can gorge on, fatten up before they head further south. So the tide's pulling us in towards Eastport as we speak, and we're drifting away from the birds that we want to look at. So why don't we motor closer to the flocks there, and then we can stop again. I see a few razorbills up here too.
Oh, yeah.
That would be good.
We're in Head Harbor Passage, just off Eastport. Behind us is the Old Sow, the largest whirlpool in the Western Hemisphere. To the right of us, Campobello. To the left, Deer Island. Ahead of us, but still out of sight, East Quoddy Head Lighthouse. We'll work our way in that general direction, zigzagging across the channel wherever we see birds and whales. 13-year-old Sarah Bartlett is driving. Her dad, Chris, is doing all the explaining. And there's a lot more to explain when Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine returns in a moment on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. If you've just joined us, we're in a small boat in Head Harbor Passage, the channel between Eastport and Campobello. The boat belongs to Chris Bartlett. Chris has served as the Marine Extension Associate for the Maine Sea Grant Program in Eastern Maine for 20 years. He works closely with coastal organizations, researchers, resource managers to figure out how to best manage and promote our fishing industry down east. Chris coordinates training and workshops and provides technical field assistance and helps local groups engaged in commercial fisheries around here. We'll get into some of that later in the show, but right now, we're looking for unusual birds, which would be a lot easier if all these cute harbor porpoises would stop popping up all around us right now next to the boat. Oh, by the way, the boat is being driven by Chris's 13-year-old daughter, Sarah, and she's doing an awesome job in these treacherous waters.
So we got harbor porpoises right next to the boat now. So first of all, where are we now?
Well, this is Head Harbor Passage proper, so we are all in New Brunswick waters now. You can see the city of Eastport is just a few miles behind us. We're in between Campobello Island and Deer Island in New Brunswick, and we're surrounded by feeding gulls.
And porpoise.
And porpoises, harbor porpoises around us.
What's a nickname for harbor porpoise, Sarah?
Puffin pig.
Puffin Pig? So all those years, the convenience store in Whiting that was named Puffin Pig is because of the porpoises?
Yeah.
I never knew that. Ever since Mike McCabe bought it and changed the name.
Now, I never knew why they actually had, a hog on the sign, since Puffin Pig is the local slang for harbor porpoise.
Well, they're popping up around us, so we have Puffin Pigs here. We were talking about Bonaparte's gulls, but they're the other gulls that we're actually out here looking for. This is a twofer. We're having an adventure in international waters between the U.S. and Canada here in Head Harbor Passage, and we're surrounded by thousands upon thousands of Bonaparte's gulls, which we talked about, but we're looking for rarities. And one of the things that makes this so good is that this is like a phenomenon. If you took a map of the world and put X's on the places where huge flocks of unusual birds might gather, this would be one of them.
It really is a special spot. As a birder, it's just, there's something new every day. Especially this time of year as the birds are migrating through.
The problem is it's such a secret. I don't know if it's a problem or not, but it's a secret.
Well, I think amongst the stalwart birding community, folks know to come. Mm-hmm. But you're right, it would be great to get the word out so that more people know about this treasure. Because you have all these birds as well as marine mammals. As you said, we have harbor porpoise around us, we have gray and harbor seal, we have at least six minke whales that spend their late summers and falls here, and we have fin whales that come and go. Mm-hmm. So it's just a wonderful place to explore. And because you're surrounded by land, you don't get the offshore swell. So folks that are a little sheepish about going out on a pelagic birding trip because they may get motion sickness, really doesn't happen here in the bay. As you see right now, it's flat calm.
Mm-hmm. And yet there's probably, on the other side of Campobello, there's probably a wind from the east at about 10 miles an hour, which would give us huge swells if we're on the other side of the island.
That's right.
Yeah. boats do this. I mean, there are commercial boats who have fun in this channel. So there are ways that people could actually come and take this adventure on Butch Harris's boats or other boats on both sides of the border. You got any favorites?
They're all good. We have, I think, 2 boats out of Lubeck, 2 boats out of Eastport, 2 or 3 boats out of Head Harbor, Campobello, New Brunswick, and then several boats out of St. Andrews, New Brunswick, and it's one that's coming towards us now.
Yeah, they're coming over here because what? They haven't got whales over there?
Well, this is their waters.
Yeah, I suppose it is, but still.
I think that they've learned that, you know, this concentration of feeding activity by marine mammals and birds is something that people enjoy to see. And so coming from St. Andrews, it's just a short zip through Letite Passage to get to the upper end of Head Harbor Passage. And all the charter companies communicate very well with each other, so they can lead each other to good findings.
Yeah, I've gotten very lazy. I can now just go with a group of birders or a tour group of some kind, sit on the pier over there up the island a little bit, or sit up there at East Quoddy Head and look to see where the whale watch boats are going. And they'll tell me where the whales are.
That's right.
Well, and speaking of which, the last few years have been very different. There was about 3 years ago, there were a lot of humpbacks and finbacks coming in close to the lighthouse up the northern tip of Campobello. Then I think the following year, most of those whales seem to be over at Black's Harbor, way up in the coast a little bit in New Brunswick.
That's right.
So everything changes every single year.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And I think you can always be guaranteed of finding minke whales and harbor porpoise, lots of birds in Head Harbor Passage.
Yeah.
The more sought after larger whales, such as humpbacks and fin whales, it's wherever the concentration of feed is for them is where they'll be. So as far as they're concerned, it's not very far to go between here and the Wolves, which is 7 miles out. But for those of us in small boats, we'd rather they fed over here.
Well, you're a marine scientist. Why is the food changing location?
Well, I don't know that that's that big of a shift when we're talking just several miles. However, we have seen such as right whales that used to feed in abundance around the Bay of Fundy near Grand Manan Island now have been very hard to find for biologists studying them. And so I would suspect that their prey species, which is a copepod that they feed on, a large zooplankton, has shifted. And I can't answer you why that shift has occurred, but it's something that I think we should find out.
Well, if you want to go study it, I'll just wait right here.
All right, Bob, sounds good. Why don't we, since the tide's pulling us back towards town, why don't we motor up a little further and see if we can get into the thick of the birds?
So we've just passed the Zodiac whale watch boat from St. Andrews. They're yelling it over at us, "Seen any minkies?" And we have just yelled back, "No." And we haven't. I'm a little surprised because there are minkies out here, and usually I can sit on the side of Campobello and just watch the minkies go by, but so far we have not actually seen one. But we are once again surrounded by harbor porpoises so close that I could toss a biscuit at them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Man, this pair was so close I could feed them by hand.
There's a big flock of birds feeding on something over by Deer Island, so we're heading over that way now. Along the way, Chris spotted some cormorants on top of a big channel marker. Although these are big, black, fish-eating birds like what you see everywhere along the Maine coast and even inland waters in Maine, these birds are not your average cormorants.
So everyone knows the cormorants that they see, let's say, in the Penobscot River or along the coast, and they all know or most people know they're double-crested cormorants, and they call them shags.
Right.
These aren't those.
They are. These are great cormorants, and they nest to the north of us, and like the other birds that we've spoke of, they come here in late summer to start feeding. These great cormorants will actually spend the winters here. And so they're about a third larger than your double-crested cormorants, and they have a white throat pouch that's very distinct from the double-crested. They also, for some reason, like to sit up high.
Yes.
And so, as we're motoring by, I asked if you'd like to see great cormorants because I knew that's what they'd be, because they're sitting as high as they possibly can get.
And they are the largest cormorants in the world. There are a bunch of different species, but these guys are the biggest, and we've got them.
It's only going to take about 3 minutes to motor over to where we can see birds, seals, and porpoises all convened in one spot near Deer Island. I'm in Chris Bartlett's boat. His 13-year-old daughter Sarah is driving. We are in Head Harbor Passage between Campobello and Deer Island. So we're in Canada at the moment, and we're looking for rare birds and minke whales, and also learning about the ecology of a place that has some of the strongest tides on the planet. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Saturday mornings at 9, Sunday mornings at 8 on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Today's show is wilder than usual. The entire program is taking place in a small skiff. I'm with Chris Bartlett, the Marine Extension Associate for the Maine Sea Grant Program up here. We left Eastport about 90 minutes ago with Chris's 13-year-old daughter Sarah at the controls so that her dad can devote his full attention to finding me unusual wildlife in Head Harbor Passage. We've been surrounded by thousands of small gulls called Bonaparte's gulls since we left the dock. Another unusual gull has now started to become more common as we motor into a big feeding flock of birds here next to Deer Island. Black-legged kittiwakes are hovering around. We're looking for really rare gulls that look a little bit like these guys. This time of year, there is the possibility of gulls from Europe, like little gulls and black-headed gulls. And there is a really rare visitor from the Arctic called a Sabin's gull that could be over here. Plus, we know there are minke whales around here somewhere.
So it looks like these gulls are diving on krill. We have black-legged kittiwakes, Bonapartes, a few herring gulls. I hear terns.
So right underneath the boat somewhere, there's a big source of food because the gulls and kittiwakes are just swarming around us. It's a little bit like watching snowfall.
It's gorgeous. Got a little gull right over here. Coming right at us. It's an immature little gull in flight.
Oh, got it.
I see a dark M on its wing. It's right off the bow. It's just tipping towards the water. So 12 o'clock, now 11 o'clock.
Yep, got him.
First cycle little gull. It looks like he's molted most of his juvenile plumage, but this year's chick. So this bird here, Sarah, with the dark M on the back of its wings, black. Coming right off the bow now. So that's one of our sought-after birds today.
Wow, that's just delightful.
Well, there. How's
There.
that? Isn't that fun?
Thank you so much.
So let's talk about him for a second.
Sure.
We talk about the rare gulls that are out here that do visit Maine waters. We don't say why they're rare. So where's this guy from?
Well, that's a really good question. So most little gulls breed in around the British Isles. They're a Western European gull. There is a small population that's been documented south of Hudson Bay. I think the last time they did any documentation was around 96. So I'm presuming that some of the little gulls that we get around here are from North America. They arrive with the Bonaparte's gulls in late July. That to me seems to indicate that they didn't come over all the way from Europe at that point. So this was a young of the year, so, this year's chick, and it could likely be from North America. Otherwise, we could be getting birds from Europe as well. We certainly get other birds from Europe, such as black-headed gull, which we're on the lookout for. We typically don't start seeing black-headed gulls here until late August. And the closest black-headed gulls that would breed in the area would be Newfoundland, in North America. Well, we beat the odds today. That's great. And Sarah, thank you so much for driving. As I was watching through my binoculars and my camera, having you drive was fantastic. Will you do it again for me?
Yeah.
Excellent. Let's go find some more.
Okay. Where are we heading?
If you'd like to head straight up through this channel, and we'll head around towards Casco Bay Island where the seals are, and then there were a lot of gulls out towards the lighthouse. But in between there's a good number of gulls. So, all right. Monkey off her back.
Yeah,
now
really.
We can have fun.
There's one. And by the way, I was already having fun.
I know.
We've only motored a few more minutes, and I just spotted a minke whale in about the same vicinity. Wherever the food is, that's where the food eaters are. Now, he was only up for a moment, but there's no mistaking it. They're 5 times bigger than the biggest porpoise. It's right around here somewhere.
They can stay down for quite a while.
Yeah.
Sure, for just a second. Just, if nothing else, it helps me hear the blow. Minke whales are the smallest of the baleen whales, and you actually can't see a spout unless it's pretty chilly out. So it helps to have the engine quiet so you can hear the exhale.
Yeah, I don't remember the last time, if ever, I've seen a minke actually blow. I think I heard once they exhale underwater, but I didn't know if that was true or not.
Well, we certainly hear them exhale, but as I mentioned, you don't see the mist from the exhale like you do on all the other larger whales. Well, that whale certainly has some business. Doesn't
Yep.
Right beside us,
Right there. Oh, right there. Oh, geez, right on top of us. He's not staying up long, that's for sure. Or around. Must be a pretty good food supply down there.
I think you're right. Well, shall we continue towards East Quoddy Head?
I believe we should, yes.
We've left the whale behind. We're still in Canadian waters between Campobello and Deer Island, and we've just got around Casco Island. We're zipping up to East Quoddy Head, where there's a famous lighthouse painted with a giant red cross. At this point, the channel opens up into the ocean. There was a lot of activity up here a few minutes ago, but boy, that can change on you fast.
Well, we've come out by East Quoddy Head Lighthouse to see if there's any activity out here, and it looks pretty quiet.
Surprisingly quiet. It's high tide, so things are going a little slack. But still. I think I've seen this lighthouse from every angle except this one.
Until now.
Until now.
Number of harbor porpoise, but
no birds gathered around them.
no. And that's a whale watching boat, but I'm not sure if they are on anything.
They look like they're just sitting there and praying.
Right. As we were coming out, there was a lot of bird activity out here, but of course there could have been a tide rip here at the time that's now slacked off.
Which is what you always see when you're sitting on the land, either in Eastport or in Campobello. The birds streaming by, they watch each other. They watch where the porpoises are, and they all go there. So what we're watching right now is razorbills, which is a relative of the puffin. And one of those little known facts, as I understand it, it's the father that brings the chicks to sea.
That's right. In around mid-August, we start seeing pairs of razorbills here in the passage, and it'll be one adult and one chick. And as you say, it's the male that's bringing the chick to sea.
We're in Canadian waters next to Campobello. It's marine scientist Chris Bartlett talking. His 13-year-old daughter Sarah is driving the boat, and we're looking for seabirds and marine mammals in some of the strongest tides in the world. This has a big influence in the area, and in fact it makes the waters around Lubec and Eastport different than anywhere else in Maine. That produces opportunity and challenges. We're going to let the boat drift, and we'll talk about all that when Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine returns on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket with Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. This entire show is coming to you from a small skiff in the tidal waters of Head Harbor Passage between Eastport and Campobello, and in the Canadian waters further up the passage. Chris Bartlett and I are looking for sea mammals and unusual birds. His 13-year-old daughter Sarah is driving the boat. We're just drifting right now so we can actually discuss how this area of Maine is really, really different.
So I work for the Maine Sea Grant College program, and I'm a Marine Extension Associate. And Maine Sea Grant College program is one of 32 programs in the country based along the sea and the Great Lakes to provide research and education around our marine and Great Lakes resources. So I work closely with commercial fishermen and commercial aquaculturists. My background is in fish diseases, and so for many years, I worked closely with veterinarians and diagnosticians and the salmon farming industry to work on health issues related to farming of farm salmon.
It's funny, in all the years I've been doing this radio program, I've never actually had the conversation with somebody who says, my background is in fish diseases.
It's a first for everything.
Yeah, it really is. Well, I mean, you touch on some things that have a little bit of controversy around them because fisheries are difficult to sustain to begin with, but scallops, alewives, I mean, these are things that have generated a little bit of controversy. How much of this do you get stuck in the middle of?
Well, certainly when there are issues that need assistance, conflict is often part of that. It's trying to balance the take of a natural resource with the sustainability of it.
And we have the same fights over forestry. I mean, anytime humans are consuming something that comes from the natural environment, you can overdo it. And finding that balance is always going to be a challenge.
That's right.
Yeah.
And, been working with the town of Pembroke on there's an alewife run in the Pennamaquan River there.
Yeah.
And ever since the town was formed, they've been harvesting those fish, and likely the Native Americans before them were harvesting them as well. And dams were put upon the river way back in the 30s for various reasons. And those dams have fishways to allow the fish to get around the dams. Those fishways haven't had any substantial work since the early 1950s.
Yeah.
And so that's a project where it feels good, where we have right from the community up, folks are interested in working towards building the number of fish that are in the area.
Well, you say the word alewife to a bass fisherman up in the headwaters of the St. Croix River, and you get a very different discussion.
That's true.
But when you talk to lobstermen about alewives, it's critical to the livelihood. It sustains, some of the industry. So it's really a commercially very necessary fish.
It certainly has a great need at the moment, both for lobster bait and also for human food. People also use it for Atlantic halibut bait. And it's important to the ecology of, these estuarine systems. There's a lot of things that eat alewives. So having those fish around is a good thing.
Yeah, they are basically food for the rest of the environment. You take away the food, you take away the rest of the critters.
That's right.
And scallops is another one that has been challenging lately.
It has, and Cobscook Bay is one of the strongholds of Atlantic sea scallop production along the Maine coast. And so it's actually being managed by the Department of Marine Resources and the harvesters as a separate zone. There are now 3 zones along the coast for managing sea scallops, and Cobscook Bay, which is, as far as the footprint of the Maine coast, is relatively small, is being managed completely differently because of the number of scallops that we have in the area.
Mackerel. When you talk to people who fish along saltwater, the only time mackerel ever comes up for discussion seems to be here. Is it because we have more here, or just nobody bothers to fish for them anywhere else?
I'm not certain, but certainly maybe it's traditional. Folks love to fish for mackerel around here, and we do have large numbers of them. Mm-hmm. And it's a recreational fishery. They're not commercially targeted up here right now. We have a pier in Eastport that's currently under construction. It's being repaired. We call it the Breakwater, and it's our municipal marina, and it's usually lined with mackerel fishermen.
I noticed.
In the summer, we can have 60 to 80 anglers there targeting mackerel and harbor pollock, and that's just a fun place to be in July and August if you want to see a lot of happy people and hear some great stories as well.
Is that an acquired taste? I mean, obviously people in the area like to eat them.
I think it must be. I mean, mackerel, like bluefish and other oily fish, has a certain fishy flavor to it, but when eaten fresh or smoked, I like it a lot. That said, we don't eat it too often, do we, Sarah?
No.
Sarah, what do you think? Is it good?
I like it smoked.
Smoked? Mm-hmm.
And we put it on the grill for a similar reason.
Yeah.
To try to get the oil out. And again, when eaten fresh, the oil isn't that distasteful.
When you talk about some of the other challenges for managing marine resources around here, 2 more come to mind right away. Rockweed harvesting and tidal power. Mm-hmm. How much of that do you get involved in? Let's start with rockweed.
In terms of rockweed, I've been assisting the Department of Marine Resources on creating a fisheries management plan. And so my role as part of Sea Grant has been to help facilitate the process. So Department of Marine Resources has brought together panels of people that are experts in various fields to discuss how rockweed fisheries management plan could be put together. And so I have been involved in terms of those discussions, Bob. Rockweed, you say that it's been a controversy, and I think it is in the sense that, again, it's another marine species, another marine organism that's being harvested, in this case for agricultural purposes, being turned into various types of fertilizers and such. And it's also habitat for a number of other species that live among it. So it's trying to create that balance of how much can be sustainably harvested while maintaining its importance in the ecosystem.
With science that needs to catch up, because we know, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we know that it's habitat for spawning fish that we're going to eat later, and we really don't know how much we can take before we start to affect the fishery.
Well, that's right, in the sense that we really would like to have more science to help guide and inform our decisions on this fisheries management, with all fisheries management, frankly, but with rockweed there hasn't been a lot of studies to help us make better informed decisions. So the more research that we can have around its importance in the ecology and what potential impacts could be caused from harvest would be very beneficial.
Yeah, because you can't just do a one-to-one correlation. You can't say that fish have declined and therefore it must be because of rockweed harvesting. The water may have warmed up, or the wind currents may have changed, or anything could happen. The study is difficult.
It very much is, and as you mentioned, those are complex questions with complex answers, and so nothing happens in a vacuum.
Well, I mean, you could take this area right now. You and I both know that redneck phalaropes, when we were much younger, used to come in here by the really hundreds of thousands, millions.
That's right.
I mean, that's a small shorebird that actually spends its winters at sea and nests up in the Arctic areas. And at one time, it was a phenomenon in here about how many were here, and then they just disappeared. That's
right. In the late 80s, they'd been documented through research. Up to 1 million birds had stopped here to molt and fatten up during their fall migration. So late summer, middle of August, they'd arrive. And around 1989, they just disappeared. Poof. In the sense that we went from up to 1 million birds down to a few thousand. There was a study that showed that there was a tenfold decrease in this copepod that they like to eat, Calanus finmarchicus, and that's the same copepod that right whales like to eat. So that's likely why the birds no longer stop here in large numbers. But why did that happen? Was it a change in the currents, change in the water temperature? It's unknown why that decrease happened in that copepod. It's something in the ecology of the area shifted. One of the challenges too is we may have had a lot of those copepods for a while, and maybe that was an explosion. Right. I mean, you look at what spruce budworm does. You and I see changes in birding whenever there's been a big outbreak, because certain northern forest species that really prey on those, dine on spruce budworm, just explode in population, and all of a sudden it seems like we get a lot of them. That's a very good point. Yeah. Usually I can make one about one a show.
Chris Bartlett is my guest. He's a marine scientist in the Cobscook Bay Area working with the Maine Sea Grant Program. For more than half a century, this area has been looked at for its potential to produce tidal power. I'll ask about that next as Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine continues on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. Welcome back to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. I am in a small boat drifting in Western Passage between Eastport and New Brunswick at the moment. I think we're back in American waters. Chris Bartlett's 13-year-old daughter Sarah is driving this boat while we talk and look for unusual critters. Chris and I are talking about how the unbelievable tides affect the wildlife, the fishing, and the other natural resources in this area. Tidal power, how much do you interact with that? I've done a bit of work around tidal power. There's a company by the name of Ocean Renewable Power Company that wanted to demonstrate their technology here in Cobscook Bay, and I worked closely with them and other marine users to help the company choose the best spots for where they wanted to test their technology. And then as part of the university, we worked with the company to look at what potential impacts their devices might have on species in the ecosystem. So Gail Zydleski's lab from the University of Maine looked very closely at what impacts might be with finfish. Mm-hmm. So we were talking about mackerel and herring and species like that.
what happens when you have these spinning blades underwater? Will the fish move around them? Will they go through them?
If they go through them, they can't be pretty.
Well, we found the devices actually spin quite slowly. So they didn't look like, again, they were using these high-tech sonar devices, these very fancy fish finders. Couldn't really see that there were any fish strikes to the unit. Some fish were going right through it. Some were schooling in front of it. Some were schooling in back of it. Some were going around it. So this was information that the regulators could use to determine whether there were any potential impacts towards fish. At this point, it doesn't look like there are any significant impacts that they could find off the bat.
Since you're right here in the border of Canada, how much interaction is there with the Canadian authorities, and do you actually have to watch where you are to make sure that whatever activities you're doing are within your area of jurisdiction?
So in terms of, our professional work, if we were to ever want to do studies across the border, we would certainly be talking with the provincial and federal governments in Canada to make sure we had the necessary permits. We tend to stay on the main side of the border when we're conducting our research. When you and I are out today looking for birds, you don't have to clear customs to come into Canadian waters unless you intend to land. So we didn't call customs today because we just stayed out on the bays.
Do you think anyone was watching us through binoculars just to make sure?
It certainly could be.
The tide obviously is just unreal through here. What does that do for your studies and the ecology of the area?
I think that's one of the things that makes this area so different than all you have to do is go, down the coast 12 miles or so to Cutler, and it's a very different in terms of the species that choose to live here. And the species richness here is also quite a bit different because the tides bring in, and it's moving so many more nutrients around. So it really is unique. When salmon farming first started, it chose this area because we actually have cooler water in the summer and warmer water in the winter. If you think about that tidal action, you don't get the stratification or the layering of, cold water on top and warmer water on the bottom. I grew up in Damariscotta. Many of our coves would ice over down there, whereas up here you get very little icing because of that mixing of the currents.
We're sitting here right between, where are we now? We're between Deer Isle and
Deer Island and Eastport, and
yeah.
Looks like we're right on the border.
Which is one of the weirdest places to ever have a radio interview, but it's fun. And at any moment, a minke whale could pop up. So you said earlier, I think, in the show that there are 6 minke whales that like to move through here. I know there's Gonzo and Breadknife. Do you know all the whales by name and sight?
I don't. So the charter boats have named them all by looking at their dorsal fins. So minke whales don't show their tail flukes like humpbacks or right whales would. So they're identifying them from that half-moon shaped fin on their back. And so it's unique scars or shapes of the dorsal fin that they're able to name them. So we have Gonzo and Breadknife and Rudolph, Slice. Slice doesn't have a dorsal fin at all.
Right. I'd forgotten about Slice.
Yeah. So there's 4, and Slice on the American side is called Stumpy.
We're actually up here in this channel right now. Just around the corner is Eastport, and we're here on the last day of the Eastport Pirate Festival. And it's nice to see Eastport get a bit rejuvenated after losing the herring industry. Essentially, things were on really hard times. Things have bounced back a little bit. But this is still an area that is not heavily visited. We don't see a lot of tourism up this way. Even Mainers don't come up in nearly the numbers they ought to. We're still a big secret up here.
The folks that don't come up are missing out, I have to say. And, we certainly know how to celebrate as well. I think the Pirate Festival is a good example of that. It's grown over, I think this maybe the 12th year. And they're expecting up to 10,000 people. So
in Eastport.
In Eastport.
In Eastport.
Which is a population a little over 1,200.
Yeah.
I think we touched upon the tourist opportunities, and I think that's the key. As we were driving up yesterday, you made a good point in that probably the best way to expand tourism is to try to expand the offerings of current operators. It's hard to get a new business going when the economic incentive isn't that great, especially to start. But to let folks know that there are opportunities in the area to get out You and I went out on the Friendship 5 yesterday and saw some humpback whales 25 miles offshore. That was a fantastic experience. This area is unique in that you're in amongst the islands as you're seeing the whales. So you're not going 25 miles off. You're in smaller boats. You don't really have to worry about motion sickness. The scenery is fantastic the whole time. And to be in amongst the whales and the seabirds so close to land, I think is pretty special.
We're out of time. Chris Bartlett has been my guest as this entire show has taken place in his small boat in the tidal rips beyond Eastport. Chris has served as the Marine Extension Associate for the Maine Sea Grant Program in Down East Maine for 20 years. My thanks to his 13-year-old daughter, Sarah, for driving the boat while we chat. If you want to share the show with somebody, it's now on the website at 929theticket.com. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Doors Equipment, Napa Auto Parts, EBS, and Supercuts in Bangor, Brewer, and Old Town. Join me again every Saturday at 9, Sunday at 8 on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket.